A warm greeting. Today is Sunday, May 3, 2026. This is meteorologist Ruben Garcia. In today's video I will be talking about the cyclonic activity we anticipate in the Atlantic during the 2026 hurricane season, which officially begins on June 1st. And in particular, I will discuss how the presence of the El Niño phenomenon during the peak of the season will have significant effects on the cyclonic activity we anticipate in the Atlantic, Caribbean Sea, and Gulf of Mexico. In addition, I will also talk about how the East Pacific hurricane season will be affecting activity in the Atlantic, since we anticipate a very active season toward western Mexico. First, I wanted you to see this animation showing sea surface temperature anomalies, and what stands out most are the warm temperatures that continue in the central Pacific and just west of Mexico. Over the past few weeks, waters in this region have continued warming and are currently between 2 and 3 degrees Celsius above normal. This is associated with the imminent development of the El Niño phenomenon, where the warm waters that typically reside in the western Pacific have continued progressing eastward, dramatically increasing the probability that we will have El Niño as early as the month of May. And according to projections, during the summer and the peak of the season, it is very likely that El Niño will continue strengthening and possibly reach what we know as a super El Niño, which happens when average temperatures in the Niño 3.4 region have anomalies above 2 degrees Celsius. The progression of warm waters across the equator in the Pacific is clearly seen in the following animation, where it is observed that below the surface, waters with the highest anomalies continue moving eastward and toward the surface. In fact, some areas at about 100 to 150 meters below the surface have anomalies above 5 degrees Celsius. This means that it is likely that the El Niño phenomenon during 2026 will be among the strongest in history. Now, we already know that this increases cyclonic activity in the eastern Pacific, but let's now discuss the effects it has on the Atlantic region. First, El Niño increases wind shear across the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, which makes the formation of tropical cyclones more difficult and also hinders the strengthening of cyclones that move from Africa. In addition, El Niño modifies atmospheric circulation across the tropics. And as you can see in this image, during years when we have El Niño, atmospheric circulation in the Pacific favors the formation of low pressure and bad weather in the central and eastern Pacific, while this circulation favors air descending from the atmosphere down to the surface in the Atlantic region. This results in greater probabilities of cyclone formation in the eastern Pacific, while making cyclone formation more difficult in the Atlantic. Compare this with La Niña events, where the circulation is the opposite, favoring air rising from the surface into the atmosphere in the Atlantic region, and therefore generating conditions of instability and low pressure that favor cyclone formation. And the opposite occurs in the Pacific, where air descends from higher levels of the atmosphere toward the surface, making the formation of low-pressure systems and cyclones more difficult. So in comparison, it is evident that El Niño and La Niña generate completely opposite circulations. El Niño favors cyclone formation in the central and eastern Pacific, while La Niña favors cyclone formation in the Atlantic region. And if we look at the historical record, here you can see the tracks of hurricanes that have formed during years with El Niño, and in particular I want you to look at the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico region when we compare with years in which we have had La Niña. Clearly, during La Niña years we see more cyclones or hurricanes compared to years when we have El Niño. The difference is very evident, and where it is most noticeable is in the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico region, where El Niño causes strong wind shear. Now, let's look at the latest projections from seasonal models. Let's begin with the European model, which for the months of August, September, and October, that is, during the peak of the Atlantic season, is projecting a strong El Niño or a super El Niño in the Pacific region, along with very warm waters toward western Mexico, while the North Atlantic region, in the main development region, anticipates sea surface temperatures near normal. It also shows a subtropical Atlantic with temperatures above normal. These potentially warmer than normal temperatures in the subtropical Atlantic also create unfavorable conditions for cyclone formation in the Atlantic. In addition, this configuration favors cyclone formation in the eastern Pacific. And typically, when we see hurricanes in that region, it is difficult to see cyclone formation in the Atlantic. This is why the European model also projects that in the main development region of the Atlantic during the peak of the season, we will have above normal atmospheric pressures, that is, less instability and very likely fewer storms and hurricanes. Meanwhile, in the central and eastern Pacific we see the opposite, with atmospheric pressures well below normal that can indicate high cyclonic activity. This is also evident when we look at precipitation anomalies expected for the summer. Notice that in the main Atlantic development region we will have tendencies toward less precipitation than normal, while in the eastern and central Pacific we will have more precipitation than normal. Similarly, if we look at projections from the CES model ensemble, we can see that during the peak of the season it shows a strong El Niño, a slightly warmer than normal subtropical Atlantic, generating unfavorable conditions for cyclonic activity in the Atlantic and favoring cyclonic activity in the eastern Pacific. Like the European model, this ensemble projects high pressures in the tropical North Atlantic and low pressures in the central and eastern Pacific, with precipitation anomalies showing above normal precipitation on the Pacific side and well below normal precipitation in the Caribbean Sea and between the Caribbean and Africa. The same pattern is repeated when we analyze the NMME model ensemble, where the development of a super El Niño is projected for the peak of the season, a warmer than normal subtropical Atlantic, and precipitation anomalies below normal between the Caribbean and Africa, in the Caribbean Sea, and above normal precipitation in the eastern Pacific region. So it is clear that everything points to the 2026 North Atlantic hurricane season being less active than normal, and that is precisely what some specialized seasonal forecast groups are predicting. As an example, Colorado State University is forecasting that 13 tropical storms will form in the Atlantic, when the normal is 14. In addition, they project that 6 of these will reach hurricane strength, when the normal is 7. And of these, only 2 would reach major hurricane status, that is, Category 3, Category 4, or Category 5, when the normal is 3. Another example is the forecast from Tropical Storm Risk, where they are predicting an extremely inactive season with only 12 storms, 5 hurricanes, and just 1 major hurricane. And compared to other groups, on average we see that most project this season to have below normal cyclonic activity in the Atlantic. Before I go, I wanted to mention that, as I showed in these images, cyclonic activity typically decreases in the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico region. However, there is a possibility that we may see some hurricanes developing between the Caribbean and Africa, but probably with tracks far from land areas. In particular, there is the possibility that we may see the formation of some cyclones toward the eastern Atlantic, since models are also projecting that the Gulf of Guinea may have warmer than normal temperatures during the peak of the season, and this can help cyclone formation in the eastern Atlantic. However, if they maintain a westward track, they will likely remain weak due to the wind shear caused by El Niño. So it makes sense to me that this Atlantic hurricane season will likely have the greatest cyclonic activity east of the Lesser Antilles and in the central subtropical Atlantic region. Now, remember that this does not mean we are out of danger. In some years with El Niño, we have seen the formation of significant hurricanes in the Caribbean Sea or the Gulf of Mexico, but it definitely reduces the probability and number of major hurricanes in that region. Well, that's all for today's video. The next video I will record this week will be about the possible development of the first cyclone of the season in the eastern Pacific by mid-May. So that you don't miss this content, I invite you to like this video. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you receive notifications when I upload new videos. And please don't forget to share with friends and family so they stay informed during this hurricane season. Well, now I say goodbye. See you later.